Angie Housman was born in 1984 and grew up in the close-knit community of St. Ann, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. As a child, Angie was known for her joyful spirit, her friendliness, and her generous heart. She lived with her mother, Diane Bone, her stepfather, Ron Bone, and her younger brother, and was also close to her extended family. Her family's home was filled with love and laughter, and Angie was cherished by everyone who knew her. From an early age, she was described as a people person. Her cousin, Christina Maguillon, who was only a year and a half older, recalled that Angie was always smiling and laughing. She would greet strangers in stores and had an easy way of making friends wherever she went. Angie's outgoing and trusting personality was a defining trait. She was the kind of child who would offer a helping hand to anyone in need and was eager to share her happiness with others. She attended Buter Elementary School, where she was a 4th grade student. She enjoyed her classes and was always willing to participate in school activities. Her teachers noted her curiosity and willingness to help other students. Her favorite activities included playing outside with friends, riding her bike, and spending time with her family and pets. She was especially fond of animals and often talked about wanting to be a veterinarian when she grew up. One story that stands out among her family's memories is when Angie won a $500 shopping spree at a local toy store. Rather than spend all the money on herself, Angie asked for a bicycle with a radio and insisted that the rest of the money be used to help other children who needed things. Her stepfather kept the bicycle for years, even as it rusted, as a testament to Angie's selflessness and kind heart. On November 18th, 1993, tragedy struck as 9-year-old Angie went missing. That Thursday began as any other. Angie got up to school and rode the school bus home as she always did. Her stop was only about 8 houses away from her family's home, and the short walk was a routine she had followed countless times without incident. Angie got off the bus at her usual stop at around 4 p.m. She was last seen by her bus driver and several classmates who watched her walk away from the bus, presumably heading home. The weather that afternoon was cold, typical for late November in Missouri, but there was nothing to suggest danger lurking so close to home. Angie never made it to her front door. When she failed to arrive home, her family became immediately concerned. After searching the neighborhood and finding no sign of Angie, her family contacted the St. Ann Police Department at approximately 7:10 p.m. The authorities responded quickly, recognizing the urgency of a missing child case. As the hours passed with no sign of the young girl, worry turned to dread. The police requested the assistance of the Major Case Squad of Greater St. Louis, activating them on November 22, 1993, to help coordinate the search and investigation. The community rallied to support the family, with neighbors, volunteers, and law enforcement combing the area for any clue that might lead to Angie's safe return. Flyers were distributed, media outlets covered the story, and tips began to pour in. Despite these efforts, there were no credible sightings or leads in the days following her disappearance. The search for Angie quickly expanded beyond St. Ann. Investigators considered the possibility that she had been abducted by a stranger, as there was no evidence to suggest she had run away or left voluntarily. The case drew attention from the FBI and other agencies, and the community held out hope that Angie would be found alive. 9 agonizing days after the disappearance, on the morning of November 27, 1993, a deer hunter made a horrific discovery in the Bush Wildlife Area in St. Charles County, about 20 miles from St. Ann. At around 10:30 a.m., the hunter stumbled upon the body of a young girl tied to a tree in a remote wooded area. Authorities were immediately called to the scene, and it was soon confirmed that the body was that of Angie Housman. The circumstances of this discovery were as disturbing as they were heartbreaking. She was found nude, her wrists handcuffed behind her back, and her head wrapped almost entirely in duct tape, leaving only her nose exposed so she could breathe. Her eyes and mouth were also covered with duct tape, and she had been gagged with fabric torn from her own underwear. The position in which she was found suggested she had been tied to the tree and left there alive. The medical examiner determined that Angie had suffered a significant violent sexual assault and had struggled extensively to free herself before she ultimately died. The autopsy revealed that Angie had not died immediately after her abduction. Instead, she had been held captive for up to a week, during which time she was tortured and assaulted. She was dehydrated, malnourished, and in a weakened state by the time she was left in the woods. The cause of death was determined to be hypothermia. Angie had succumbed to the freezing temperatures, likely only hours before her body was discovered. Ice had begun to form over her body, indicating that she was exposed to the elements for some time before her death. The forensic evidence collected at the scene included duct tape, handcuffs, and a fingerprint on the tape, as well as biological evidence such as semen. However, forensic technology in 1993 was not advanced enough to yield definitive results. DNA analysis was in its infancy, and the evidence could not be matched to any known suspects at the time. The fingerprint was run through available databases, but no match was found. Investigators preserved all evidence meticulously, hoping that future advances in technology would provide answers. The major case squad worked for more than a year, chasing down every possible lead. According to Lieutenant Colonel John Langford, who was heavily involved in the case, the volume of leads was overwhelming. If we had 15 leads called in that week, we were going to have 15 different investigations going, he later recalled. Every tip, no matter how small or unlikely, was pursued. Detectives interviewed known sex offenders, checked alibis, and investigated anyone with a history of violence or sexual crimes against children in the area. They also explored the possibility of a connection to other unsolved cases, such as the abduction and murder of Cassidy Senter, another young girl who disappeared in nearby Hazelwood just a month after Angie. This raised fears of a serial predator, but the cases were ultimately found to be unrelated. Investigators also faced the challenge of public fear and media scrutiny. The case received extensive coverage and the community was on high alert. Parents kept their children close and rumors swirled about possible suspects. Innocent people were named and questioned, adding to the emotional toll on the community and law enforcement alike. The pressure to solve the case was immense, but every promising lead seemed to end in disappointment. Over the years, the case was periodically reviewed as new technology became available. Evidence was re-examined and DNA samples were tested against expanding databases. In 2017, investigators thought they had finally found the killer, but the lead turned out to be another dead end. Nevertheless, detectives continued to follow up on tips and recheck facts, refusing to let Angie's case fade into obscurity. Fast forward to 2019, a pivotal moment came when forensic lab technicians retested evidence from the case. They focused on a piece of her underwear, specifically the pink trim of 2 torn pieces found at the crime scene. This item had been preserved for decades and was now subjected to the most advanced DNA analysis available. The results were stunning. Analysts identified DNA belonging to 2 individuals, Angie Housman and an unknown male. When this unknown DNA profile was analyzed, it matched Earl Webster Cox, a convicted child predator who was already in federal custody. Earl Cox was no stranger to law enforcement. Born and raised in St. Louis, he had a long and disturbing criminal history. In 1975, Earl enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, but in 1982, he was dishonorably discharged after multiple sex offenses involving juveniles while stationed in Germany. He was court-martialed and sentenced to 8 years in Leavenworth Penitentiary. After his release in 1985, Earl was placed on parole and moved to Missouri, living only a quarter mile from where Angie was abducted. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, Earl continued to offend. In 1989, he was investigated and later charged in Overland, Missouri for the sexual abuse of 2 girls at a park near Buter Elementary School where Angie attended. His parole was revoked and he was sent back to prison only to be released again in December 1992. By the time of Angie's abduction in November 1993, Cox was living in the St. Anne area. His criminal activity did not stop there. He later ran an international child pornography ring and was deemed by the state a sexually dangerous person likely to reoffend if released. At the time of the DNA match in 2019, Cox was incarcerated in a federal facility in North Carolina under the Adam Walsh Act, which allows for the indefinite detention of dangerous individuals. With the DNA match in hand, St. Charles County prosecuting attorney Tim Lomar and his team moved swiftly. On June 5, 2019, Lomar announced that Earl had been charged with first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and sodomy in connection with Angie Housman's death. The charges were based not only on the DNA evidence, but also on Earl's history and proximity to Angie's home at the time of her abduction. While the DNA evidence against Earl was overwhelming, investigators and prosecutors expressed doubts that he acted alone. Tim stated at a press conference that there was reason to believe another individual may have been involved in Angie's abduction and murder. No one was eliminated as a suspect, and the investigation remained open to the possibility of additional perpetrators. Tim expressed confidence that new leads would surface, potentially pointing to other individuals connected to the crime. Once charged, Earl was transferred from federal custody in North Carolina to Missouri to face trial. The DNA evidence was so compelling that Earl ultimately pleaded guilty to the charges, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. This plea ensured that he would never be released to harm another child. Cassidy Senter was born in the early 1980s and grew up in Hazelwood, a quiet family-oriented suburb just northwest of St. Louis, Missouri. The Senter family, consisting of Cassidy, her parents, and at least one sibling, was known in their neighborhood as friendly and close-knit. Cassidy's parents worked hard to provide a stable and nurturing environment, emphasizing the importance of education, kindness, and community involvement. Their home on Tall Tree Court was situated in a neighborhood considered safe, where children often played outside and walked to friends' houses without fear. From a young age, Cassidy was described as bright, energetic, and deeply compassionate. Friends and teachers at her elementary school recalled her as a diligent student who enjoyed reading, art, and participating in class activities. She was particularly fond of drawing and was often seen with a sketchbook, capturing scenes from her life or creating imaginative stories through her illustrations. Cassidy's teachers noted her curiosity and eagerness to learn, qualities that made her well-liked among her peers and respected by adults. She participated in after-school activities including Girl Scouts and local sports teams, which helped her develop teamwork skills and a sense of responsibility. On weekends, she enjoyed riding her bike, playing in local parks, and visiting friends' houses for sleepovers or homework sessions. Her parents encouraged her independence while maintaining clear boundaries, trusting her to walk short distances in their suburban neighborhood, a reflection of the sense of safety at the time. On December 1st, 1993, Cassidy returned home from school as she did every weekday. She and her mother, Rhonda, lived in the lower half of a house which was owned by Michael Goldbeck. That afternoon, Cassidy briefly visited with Goldbeck, who took a moment to check that her personal alarm, a small yellow device meant to emit a loud noise if she was in danger, was working properly. Satisfied that she was safe, Cassidy left the house at about 3:30 p.m., intending to walk a short distance up Tall Tree Court toward a friend's house on Spring Forest Lane. Around the same time, Mr. and Mrs. Haneke, who lived on Spring Forest Lane, heard a strange noise coming from their property. Investigating the source, they discovered a yellow alarm, still buzzing, and a pen lying near their property line. Unbeknownst to them at the time, these items belonged to Cassidy Senter. The alarm's presence outside, actively sounding, was the first sign that something had gone terribly wrong. Rhonda returned home a few minutes after 5 p.m. Upon calling Cassidy's friend's house, she was alarmed to learn that her daughter had never arrived. Concerned, Rhonda and Goldbeck searched the neighborhood, but their efforts yielded nothing. Around this time, they received word that Cassidy's personal alarm had been found on the Haneke's lawn. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Goldbeck contacted the police. Law enforcement responded immediately, launching a ground and air search that continued for days. The case quickly drew significant attention due to the circumstances and the fact that another young girl, Angie Housman, who we just discussed, had recently disappeared and been found murdered in the same region. The St. Louis Area Major Crimes Task Force, including both city and county police, coordinated the investigation, and the FBI provided technical support. Despite the intensive search, days passed without any sign of Cassidy. On the morning of December 9th, 1993, two people walking in an alley in the city of St. Louis made a grim discovery. They found the body of a young girl, later identified as Cassidy Senter, wrapped in two bed comforters and a pink curtain. Her jacket and sweater were pulled up above her chest, and her jeans were pulled down over her ankles inside out. A sheet was looped around each ankle and tied in the middle, binding her legs together. The body was clothed in the same pink and white polka dot shirt and white tennis shoes that Cassidy had been wearing when she disappeared. Cassidy's mother was called to the police morgue, where she made the heartbreaking identification. The location where Cassidy's body was found was a heavily traveled alley with several vacant lots, making it unlikely the body had been there for long. Investigators believe the body had been moved there shortly before its discovery. The autopsy revealed that Cassidy had suffered at least 4 abrasions to her scalp and multiple skull fractures, as well as numerous bruises on her face, chest, abdomen, and back. The condition of her scalp and the distribution of the injuries indicated that she was alive when she received most of the blows. The medical examiner concluded that Cassidy died from at least 5 significant blows to the head, and that she likely lived less than an hour after the attack. Decomposition in the upper portion of her body suggested she had been dead for several days before being found. As the investigation continued, forensic evidence became critical. Police examined tire tracks at the scene where Cassidy's body was found and discovered a unique tire pattern that could only have been made by a Goodyear Workhorse light truck tire. Investigators soon learned that a man named Thomas Brooks Jr. had rented a U-Haul truck from a local rental company in Hazelwood on December 8th, the day before Cassidy's body was found. A neighbor of Thomas's sister named Cassandra Quinn reported seeing a U-Haul truck backing out of her driveway that same day. When police compared the tire tracks at the scene to the tires on the U-Haul truck Brooks had rented, they found a positive match. Further investigation revealed that Denise Johnson, a previous tenant of Cassandra Quinn's home, had left behind a pink floral comforter and pink curtains, items that matched those found wrapped around Cassidy's body. Police obtained a search warrant for Cassandra's home, where they collected hair and fiber evidence. Laboratory analysis showed that fibers from the residence matched those found on Cassidy's body, the comforters, the curtain, and even her clothing. DNA testing confirmed that bloodstains on the basement floor matched Cassidy's blood, and a bed slat recovered from the basement was consistent with the weapon used to inflict Cassidy's fatal head injuries. Paint from a U-Haul dolly matched paint samples found on the sheets, comforters, and clothing recovered with Cassidy's body. On February 3rd, 1994, Thomas Brooks Jr. was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and attempted rape. He was held without bond at the St. Louis County Jail. His sister and another resident of her home, LaFrance Wilson, were also charged with hindering prosecution for lying to investigators about Brooks's involvement. Brooks initially denied any involvement in Cassidy's death. However, after further questioning, he changed his story multiple times before ultimately confessing. According to his final statement, Brooks had been at his sister's house when he saw Cassidy walking up the yard. Cassidy asked if his nephews were home, and Brooks seized the opportunity to grab her by the hand and drag her down the basement steps. Cassidy's fall down the stairs activated her personal alarm, which Brooks picked up, took upstairs, and threw outside, where it was later found by the neighbors. He returned to the basement, told Cassidy to pull her pants down, and when she screamed and tried to escape, decided to kill her. He struck her in the head multiple times with a bed slat until she collapsed. Brooks then covered Cassidy's body with bedding and drapery and left for work. The following day, Brooks' sister told him she did not want to know anything about the body in her basement and insisted he remove it. Brooks returned and moved Cassidy's body behind a freezer to better conceal it. On December 8th, he rented the U-Haul truck, worked his shift, then returned to Cassandra's house, removed the body using a 2-wheel dolly, and drove it to the alley in St. Louis where it was ultimately discovered. His trial began in September 1995. Prosecutors presented overwhelming physical evidence, including forensic links and the confession, to establish his guilt. They also highlighted Brooks's violent history and pattern of predatory behavior. The defense attempted to argue that Brooks's troubled upbringing and intellectual limitations should be considered mitigating factors, but the jury ultimately rejected these arguments. Brooks was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. His legal team appealed the conviction, challenging the admissibility of his confession and the proportionality of the death penalty, but the courts upheld the verdict due to the severity of the crime and the strength of the evidence. Brooks died in prison in 2011 before his execution could be carried out. Ennis Cosby, the son of Bill Cosby, was murdered in the early hours of January 16, 1997 in a crime that shocked the nation and devastated his family. The events of that night, pieced together from witness accounts, forensic evidence, and later confessions, reveal a tragic sequence. Ennis, then 27 years old, was in Los Angeles during his winter break from graduate studies at Columbia University's Teachers College. He was known for his intelligence, warmth, and advocacy for people with learning disabilities, having overcome dyslexia himself. On the night of his murder, Ennis was driving his mother's dark green Mercedes-Benz SL convertible north on Interstate 405, passing through the Sepulveda Pass in the Bel Air neighborhood of Los Angeles. At approximately 1 a.m., Ennis experienced a flat tire and pulled off the freeway onto Skirball Center Drive, a dimly lit side road. He called Stephanie Crane, a woman he had recently begun seeing, to let her know about his predicament. Crane drove out to meet him, arriving a short time later. She parked her car behind Ennis's Mercedes, using her headlights to illuminate the area so he could change the tire. Crane tried to persuade Ennis to call a tow truck, but he insisted on handling the repair himself. As he worked on the tire, Crane remained in her car with the engine and heater running, watching him through the windshield. Suddenly, a man appeared at her window. He was wearing a light-colored knit cap and, according to Crane, seemed bumbling and unsure of himself. The man threatened her, saying, "Open the door or I'll kill you." Terrified, Crane immediately drove away, but only for about 50 feet. She stopped and turned around, hoping her abrupt action would scare off the intruder and protect Ennis. In those brief moments, she heard a gunshot. Crane quickly returned to the scene, frantic and calling out for Ennis. She saw a man running toward a parked car nearby. Then she looked down and found Ennis lying on the ground beside the driver's side of his vehicle in a pool of blood. She called police using her car phone, and they arrived soon after. The initial police assessment suggested robbery as the motive, but the scene raised questions. Ennis was still wearing his Rolex watch, and $60 in cash remained in his pocket, indicating the killer had either been interrupted or fled in haste. Forensic analysis of the scene later revealed that Ennis had been shot at close range within 4 feet, as evidenced by gunpowder residue on the left side of his face. Crime scene photographs, which were not published but described in media reports, showed Ennis lying face up, his right hand still clutching a pack of Natural American Spirit cigarettes. Notably, his corpse had a split but unswollen lip, suggesting he was struck in the mouth after he had already died, a detail that pointed to additional violence inflicted post-mortem. When questioned by police, Crane stated that the culprit was a slender white man aged around 25 to 35. Despite the high-profile nature of the case, the initial investigation faced significant challenges. Investigators considered several possibilities, including whether the killer had simply stumbled upon Ennis or if the tire had been intentionally sabotaged to lure him to a vulnerable location. They examined the flat tire for signs of tampering and reviewed cellular phone records, but these avenues did not yield immediate breakthroughs. Another witness reported seeing a suspicious car in the area around the time of the shooting. Police released a drawing of this driver, labeling him a possible witness wanted for questioning. Days after the sketches were made public, police detained a man matching the description, but he was ultimately found to have no connection to the crime. With few concrete leads, the investigation threatened to stall. The murder of Bill Cosby's son generated intense media scrutiny, which was both a blessing and a curse for investigators. The LAPD was inundated with more than 800 tips from the public, many of which had to be painstakingly investigated and ultimately ruled out. The high-profile nature of the case also prompted the National Enquirer to offer a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the killer. While the reward generated a flood of tips, it was one particular call that would prove decisive. The caller provided information about the murder that had not been made public, including the correct caliber of the gun used, a .38, not the 9mm that had been widely reported by the press. The caller also relayed that he had overheard a man talking about, quote, killing a black guy, a chilling detail that matched the circumstances of the crime. This tipster, later identified as Christopher So, was a former acquaintance of a man named Mikhail Markasev, who would turn out to be the man responsible for the killing. The tip from So led police to focus on Markasev, an 18-year-old Ukrainian immigrant who had come to the United States with his mother in 1989. He had a juvenile criminal record and was known to police for previous arrests related to drug possession. He lived in North Hollywood and worked at a local pottery shop. So's information was crucial not only for its accuracy, but also because he was able to lead police to the location where the murder weapon had been discarded. So revealed that 2 days after the killing, he had driven Markasev and another friend, Michael Chang, to the area near the murder scene so they could search for the gun. Markasev was described as agitated and panicked during this trip, repeatedly insisting, "I got to go back, I got to find that gun, I got to go away from here, I got to hide out." So also testified that Markasev had openly admitted to the killing, saying, "I killed a N-word. It's big. It's all over the news." When So realized the magnitude of what Markasev was saying, he recognized Markasev from the composite sketch broadcast on television and decided to contact the National Enquirer instead of the police, citing a personal dislike for law enforcement due to a previous embezzlement arrest. With So's guidance, police recovered the .38 caliber revolver and a knitted cap in a wooded area a few miles from the murder scene. Ballistics tests confirmed that the gun was the one used to kill Ennis, and forensic analysis linked a hair found in the cap to Markasev. On March 12, 1997, nearly 2 months after the murder, police arrested Markasev at his North Hollywood apartment. He was taken into custody without incident. The following day, prosecutors filed charges of murder and attempted robbery against him. The indictment included the special circumstance of murder committed during an attempted robbery, making Markasev eligible for the death penalty under California law. He pleaded not guilty to the charges. The grand jury convened in April 1997 and indicted him on both counts, allowing the case to proceed directly to trial without a preliminary hearing. Markasev's acquaintances Sarah Peters and Michael Chang testified before the grand jury about the events of the night of the murder. Peters recalled that she, her boyfriend Eli Zachariah, and Markasev had been using cocaine and and had stopped at a park and ride lot about 450 feet from where Ennis was fixing his tire. While Eli was on the phone, Markasev left without explanation, and within minutes, Peters heard a loud noise like a car backfiring. Markasev returned, urging them to leave immediately but refusing to explain what had happened. Their subsequent stop at a wooded area matched the location where the murder weapon was later found. Michael Chung later attempted to help Markasev find the discarded gun. In his statement to the grand jury, Chung said that Markasev had admitted to killing Ennis, explaining that Ennis was frightened when he pulled the gun and demanded money, and that he shot him because he was taking too long to comply. In addition to forensic evidence, investigators intercepted a letter from the suspect to an acquaintance. In it, Markasev admitted to the murder, writing, "I shot the N-word. I went to rob a connection and obviously found something else." Markasev's attorneys tried to argue that the letters were forged and that Eli was the real killer, but these arguments were ultimately rejected by the court. After his indictment, Markasev continued to plead not guilty to the charges. Prosecutors initially considered seeking the death penalty, but later announced that they would not pursue it. Jury selection for the trial began in June 1998, and the prosecution presented a 5-day case that included eyewitness testimony, the confession letters, forensic evidence linking Markasev to the murder weapon, and testimony from witnesses who said Markasev had searched for the gun and spoken of shooting a black man. The defense attempted to cast doubt on the police investigation, suggesting that the lineup had been rigged and that witnesses were motivated by the reward money offered by tabloids. In February 2001, Markasev wrote a letter to California Deputy Attorney General Kyle Brody in which he finally confessed to the crime. In his letter, he stated, "I am guilty and I want to do the right thing. More than anything, I want to apologize to the victim's family. It is my duty as a Christian, and it's the least I can do after the great wickedness for which I am responsible. This is not about me, but about those whose lives I've marred. My motive is to at least try to mend the things which I've destroyed." He also asked that the Cosby family receive a copy of his notice of abandonment of appeals, and he expressed a desire to apologize personally to them. This confession came after years of appeals and public denials, and legal experts noted that it likely closed any remaining avenues for overturning his conviction. Ultimately, Markasev was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for using a firearm during the commission of the crime.